In 2011, you did an ad for Volkswagen that is known as the ad that changed Super Bowl advertising forever. That was a headline, which is kind of funny given that you're now the CMO of the NFL. But before it could be the ad that changed Super Bowl advertising forever, you had to change a few minds. Tell us a story about it.
Yeah, well, everyone knows that there's a tremendous amount of pressure to do any Super Bowl ad, right? And because everyone's nervous that you're on the biggest stage, right? It's a lot of money. Everyone's looking at it. Everyone's going to grade it. They got the USA Today ad meter, that's going to come out, and everyone's going to look at it and so forth. And even, believe it or not, and I work for Volkswagen, a German company. The headquarters are based in Wolfsburg. Even the executives in Wolfsburg were really nervous about the whole thing. Well, it was a relatively new agency at the time, Deutsche LA, and they had an ad that was, I saw immediately when they presented it to me, was just gold, right? But it was for a car. It was a new car, the first car that we did there in Chattanooga, first time that they had manufacturing in the United States. And the car wasn't coming out until, I think, September or something. So it was like 6 months or something before the car came out. And, they're like, well, we can't go this early with this ad.
Those who said that were your bosses in Wolfsburg.
We're not going to spend all this money and come out with this ad this early. And I said, well, first of all, you can't think of this as a product ad. This is an ad for the brand, right? This is going to make people think differently about Volkswagen. And, Volkswagen, it's like one of the leading car manufacturers, of course, in the world, together with Toyota. But in the United States, they're still a niche brand, right? Like, this is a way to really get people to pay attention. In particular in 2011. Yeah, exactly. And this is a way to really get people to pay attention to this car brand and get them interested in all of our cars, including the car that
was that the brief? I mean, was that the brief that you gave to Deutsche?
Oh, it was a brand ad. Yeah. The brief was a brand ad. Okay. Now, on top of that, I said, and let's be honest. If you come out, this car is going to come out. There's going to be a ton of press and a lot of big campaigns around this car. When you put it out this early, people are going to think this must be a big deal, right? This must be a really important car to be talking about this early before it comes out in the fall.
By the way, which Volkswagen are we talking about?
It was the new Passat, right?
Okay.
And the 2012 Passat. It was going to be coming out in the U.S., but it was important. It was that it was the first car that they were going to manufacture in the new Chattanooga factory.
Right.
Again, that's why there was so much pressure on the whole thing. And there was so much focus and interest in it. But again, because it was a Super Bowl ad, it was a big deal. So anyway, ultimately, we kept trying, and we had a little bit of time before we had to make a final decision. And we kept looking at different ideas. But every time there was another round of work, I mean, it was just nowhere near as powerful as that ad. And I was going to be damned if I wasn't doing that ad. I mean, I was doing that ad, one way or the other. So I just kept I just was relentless in the way that I sort of talked about that ad and how it was going to bring the brand back and how it was going to create so much excitement, and it would be the talk of the whole Super Bowl and so forth. To the point to where even the agency was getting nervous because they knew my boss, who was the head CEO of Volkswagen North America, was also very influenced by the guys in Wolfsburg. So he didn't want to do it either. Right. So essentially it was me trying to defend it against my own executives in North America and Germany. And then the agency started getting nervous, right? So the top levels of the agency was just like, oh, we don't want to do this because...
Is that because you were just creating expectations that were sky high or why? What were they?
No, because I was being so damn stubborn. Right, because I was just being like, no, we're doing it.
No, but why was the agency nervous? Shouldn't be your
stubbornness. Because they knew that the CEO of North America was getting angry.
I see.
Right, he had enough of it. He was fed up. He wanted to do what the executives in Wolfsburg wanted to do, and I was just like, that's just the wrong decision. I mean, that's just a really bad decision. So I just kept.
What was your?
I refused to take no for an answer.
Why did they think you were wrong, And how did you ultimately convince them?
Because they couldn't get their head around the beginning. They couldn't get their head around the timing of when you're supposed to do a car launch.
They all supposed to.
You're supposed to conventional wisdom was you're supposed to do a car launch 2 to 2.5, 3 weeks before the car came out. And of course, we launched a lot of cars, so that was the normal cadence of when you would come out with something like that. But so I had to really, and ultimately, I think that the argument that won them over was that this was going to lift the brand. This was going to create a halo around the Volkswagen brand, and that all of the cars underneath the umbrella would benefit from it. And ultimately, it would drive our sales short-term and long-term, because people would like the brand, they'd be more interested in it, and ultimately they would come in and buy a car, right?
And did it?
And it did. Oh, listen, that was one of the great things about actually both of my companies I worked for, Volvo and Volkswagen. Very unconventional campaigns on both brands, but it drove interest, and it ultimately drove traffic into the dealerships, which resulted in sales. Right?
So for our listeners and viewers, we're talking about what was the Darth Vader ad in 2011. Right. Why did it? What did it do? The first. What did it do that changed Super Bowl advertising from your perspective, if not from whoever wrote that headline?
Time magazine came out. There's a lot of discussion around that ad because, again, talk about conventional wisdom. At the time, none of the big advertisers were putting their ads out there before the actual game itself, right? So the conventional wisdom was you always waited to debut your ad on the actual game.
So we have you to thank for the onslaught.
You're welcome. Right. The craziness that we all have right now.
Yeah, nice job,
because
dude.
and the reason for that, it's very simple. Again, believing in your gut, right? The reason for that is that I only had a 30-second slot, right, for the ad, and I did everything in my power to get a 60. I was begging people. I was calling the NFL. I can't remember which network was running it, but I was calling everybody to try to get a 60 on there. And the reason for that was because the 30 was fantastic. The 60 was absolutely brilliant. So when I saw the edits, and we worked hard to get the 30 as great as it could be, and again, it was very, very strong, but not like the 60. The 60 was amazing.
Right.
So I'm like, everyone's got to see that 60. So I just said, well, fine, then we'll just put it on YouTube. Put it like on Wednesday or Thursday, we'll put it on YouTube. And oh my God, everybody was going nuts because they're like, no, you don't do that. You don't put the ad on before the game.
Did they think you were cannibalizing your own investment?
Yeah, they thought that it would be less interesting. They thought it would be less powerful, right? They thought it would be a letdown because they'd already seen it before, right? It wouldn't be as special.
And you rejected
And I
that
argued
premise.
just the opposite. I said, no. This thing's going to catch fire. Everyone's going to be talking about it by Friday. So all the networks are going to, the roundup of the Super Bowl ads to watch, they're all going to be like just going off about this new ad from Volkswagen. And ultimately, before the game ever starts, we're going to win, right? We're going to win the ad war. And I tell you, everybody fought me on that. Like, it was just like, but I was sure that it would catch fire. So ultimately, that's what happened. It was funny because my niece called me like as soon as we put it out there, like on a Wednesday, and the next morning I had over 150,000 views or something like that, which at that time was crazy. At that time, 2011 was crazy. And she goes, "Oh, Uncle Tim, your ad went viral." I'm like, "Yeah." So
Thanksgiving was going to be so much better that year.
And then, of course, what happens is that everybody took credit for that. Once we made the decision, everyone like, yeah, we always knew it would catch fire. I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever.
So actually, that's interesting, right? Success has many parents. Failure not often. Is that the case? While it may have changed Super Bowl advertising, certainly pregame advertising, did it fundamentally change the way your North American CEO and the folks in Wolfsburg thought about marketing? Or was it?
Yeah, I did. I think that they realized that great creative, a story well told and executed well, that while the messaging was very important, that the power of that creative could actually move people, right? That you could create a sensation with just a really well developed and executed piece of work. And I've always believed in the power of great creative and what it can do. And I think that, listen, you have to get the respect, you have to prove it, right, before people will trust you.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think that's what happened. I mean, we did a lot of very unconventional things.
I want to stick a pin in that because I want to get into the unconventional. But first, for the audience, if you haven't caught on, today I'm sitting with Tim Ellis, who is currently and since 2018 the CMO of the NFL. Before joining the league as CMO, you were CMO at Activision, and your career has played out with many firsts in both the client and agency side, in addition, in the U.S. and Europe, in addition to Volkswagen, work with Goodby, Silverstein Partners, Publicis, and others. You have a reputation, and I believe from my experience with you, which is not limited, that it is deserved, of doing the unconventional, of challenging the norms. I tend to think that in much of life, we have to earn the permission from those we work with, those who love us and whom we love, to fuck up, to make mistakes, right? Because forgiveness is what allows everything to keep moving forward, amongst other things, I suppose. I've been in therapy a long time. You've always kind of assumed the permission, right? You've assumed the permission and then gone to earn it. Inside an organization like the one where you are today, where you have a board, I'll put that word in quotes for the moment, of not just the commissioner, but 32 of the most successful, wealthiest, powerful people in the world as that board. How do you balance your instincts and drive for the unconventional with perhaps their comfort with a more traditional approach? How do you go do what you want to do without letting what perhaps they don't know en masse about what you do and why it matters get in the way?
I'm incredibly honest and transparent about what I think of how something's going to work or not work, right? I just tell the truth, right? And I don't hold back. So if some of that truth is not altogether positive, it's important, right? So they understand. And I think that you kind of like earn the trust and credibility just by being, I say brutally honest, but just really by telling them what you know and how you think it's all going to play out. So when I first got to the NFL, I was very open about like, hey, here's where we are. Everything looks really good, right? You've got lots of people consistently watching programs and so forth. But if you go deeper, if you're watching the games, if you go deeper, you see that there's been a steady trend downward of the youth audience, and you're losing females. You're nowhere near where you need to be with Latinos, right? And I said, and by the way, if you look at us from a cultural perspective, right, compared to all the other major sports leagues, we're at the bottom, like at the very, very bottom.
So, but it's interesting, right? And every marketer today is talking about cultural resonance and relevance, like moving at the speed of culture, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. I don't even know what that means anymore. But you were at the bottom of culture as you just described it, and I want you to unpack what that means. And yet, you were still selling more tickets, driving higher ratings, and more licensing revenue than I think any other league, right? So the the monetization of brand, business, and product was going gangbusters. Why'd they care?
They cared because I proved out to them that if they didn't make some changes right away, that their brand was going to continue to sink and age out, essentially, because all the people who were propping up the numbers were basically 40-plus white guys.
Those are me. That's me.
That's you. Sorry. You and me, right? It's guys like you and me who were like propping up. And like I said, the numbers look good right? If you just look at how many people were tuning into the game, although at that time there was beginning to, you could see that the numbers were starting to go downwards a little bit, right?
Yeah, but what's interesting still is, of course, the numbers are going down as media fragments, as viewing habits change.
That's part of it, yeah.
But you're still, like, in a world where mass media no longer exists, the NFL week in and week out, putting aside even the Super Bowl, is kind of the last vestige of mass media.
Well, you got to be careful to not get too caught up in your numbers or your success currently, right?
Sure.
Because I explained, I think I explained to them in great detail why it mattered. I mean, right, to future-proof the league, right? Because obviously people age out, right? So if you don't, and we knew, and I just showed them the data. If you didn't get a young person to be a fan by the time they were 18, the likelihood of getting them to be a fan was almost impossible. It just didn't happen. Like, there wasn't an acquisition strategy for a 32-year-old, right? And so I showed them that, and I said, and so you're just to put for the top of the funnel, just to get more people into to watching the games and to be fans. If you don't do that now, your numbers are going to dwindle every single year, right?
Yeah, because in your business, at least the business you're in today, it's not that they age out, it's that they die, right? Because you're a fan for life.
Age out meaning dead.
Yeah, dead.
Yeah.
So they become so TAM kind of shrinks in that moment,
right,
unless you've got an aggressive acquisition strategy.
And the population growth that was being driven by Latinos, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were nowhere near where we needed to be. Just to keep up with population growth, we were nowhere near where we needed to be. And then when I showed them, like, even girls and women, there was a lot of women, like casual fans who would maybe watch a game or two or three, right, per season, but they weren't really into the sport. So I said, like, okay, we may have 45, 46% casual women as casual fans, but they need to be more avid. We have a very, very low base of avid fans. That's not good.
Yeah.
Right. And so I started ringing the bell of urgency immediately. As soon as I went in there, I said, here's what's going to happen. I just showed it to them. I said, here's what's going to happen to us if we don't do something right away. And by the way, it needs to be relevant for young people to care, right? So when we talk about cultural resonance, that really matters. And at that time, the NBA was doing quite well, from a cultural perspective, youth culture. And I said that we needed to do a lot of things, not only to bring these young people into the brand so it would strengthen the brand over time and future-proof the brand, but it would also drive energy into the brand. It would make it feel more relevant to young people and exciting to young people, which, by the way, also impacts older people, right? Mm-hmm. So we begin to do lots of things as sort of, to connect with younger audiences, to bring in youth culture in a much bigger way. We focused on music, gaming, and fashion. Those are like the three things we just religiously focused on for several years. We did a campaign that was and I shouldn't say a campaign, we did a marketing strategy that I just called the helmets off strategy. And essentially all that really meant was, like, no one knows who our players are, first of all. Right, they're wearing helmets. Right, and even when they score a touchdown, they still have to keep their helmets on because of the rules of the game. So I said, just so people recognize our players, we've got to do all of our marketing now with their helmets off. But more importantly, we got to know who these guys are. For people to care and get involved, we have to show them as human beings, not just as elite athletes.
Right, that's the narrative.
Yeah. Exactly. So they connect with them on a human level.
It's funny. I was talking to Linda Buff in an earlier episode, and she said something that your helmets off strategy reminds me of, which is when she was talking about her time as CMO at GE. She talked about the need to make the invisible, in her case, engines, visible. Right. And I think that's a little bit, or maybe a lot, of what you were doing, and kind of, going behind the curtain so that you can connect to and understand and relate to, in your case, players.
That's right. And show them as human beings, and talk about the things that your fans want to hear about, or they also are interested in. I mean, I said music, fashion, and gaming. Those happen to be the three things that young people most care about. Right. And then, dare to be vulnerable and show them in a more compassionate light as well. I mean,
did the players get it? I mean, since the players were closer to the demographic that you were trying to bring in, right? They're all in their 20s, more or less. did they understand it? Did they connect to
Oh,
it in a way that helped bring the quote unquote board along?
immediately. And they, by the way, they want to grow their own brands,
Right.
right?
Right. Of course.
Most of these guys don't last more than 2 or 3 years in the league, right? So growing your own brand was also important to these players, and actually caring enough to listen to them and develop a relationship that wasn't just transactional, right? And so when you took the time to actually get to know them and help them express themselves in a way that would make them successful, not just on the field but off the field, we just in some degrees we like repaired relationships, but in mostly what we were doing is developing strong relationships. And like I can give you an example of something like mental health, right? A lot of these players care deeply about mental health, and you can imagine the stress of like being an elite athlete like that.
I mean, I can only imagine it.
Yeah,
I can't relate to it.
Yeah, there you go. Well, but we all have stress, but like these guys, the stress is incredible, right? And so, and they obviously they also have, as we all do, they also have friends and relatives and so forth who suffer from anxiety and depression, and so they wanted to be in a campaign that I thought was very important. I started listening to the fans out there, and one of the things I saw, which caught my eye, was like they wanted to hear the NFL talk about the importance of mental health and mental wellness.
Well, you and I are both on the board of the Ad Council, and what I want to just open the aperture on your story, because what you did here and for this campaign went beyond the league, went beyond the NFL, and you led the effort to recruit what I think became the participation of 11 leagues.
11, yeah.
And I'm fascinated about when at least theoretical competition becomes collaboration, and what that was like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Lisa, the CEO there, I talked to her.
Lisa Sherman,
Lisa Sherman, yeah. I talked to her about how our fans had responded to the mental health campaign and how powerful it was.
The Ad Council's
to
campaign,
have these, and to have these athletes speak in such an open, vulnerable way, just how meaningful it was, right? And it was also meaningful to other players that they dared get out there and talk in such a vulnerable way. And so I was just like, just imagine if we can get all the leagues together, right? And like, because I'm sure if NFL athletes would feel like they wanted to contribute to this and help, then I'm sure other athletes would as well. And so, this is an area where there really isn't any competition, right? Like this is an area that is we can all relate to.
Competition.
And transcends. We talk about. I have a dual strategy at the NFL. One is like focus on the joy of the game, and the other is to transcend the game, right? And this is definitely a transcend the game area of focus. And so, Lisa and the team there over at Ad Council, they helped me kind of bring the people together, and we talked about the importance of it. We talked about whether we could, get some of our best athletes and do this. And I just shared, both my knowledge and experience and the data behind what I had done, but also shared my passion for it, right? And why I thought it mattered and why it was so important to professional athletes. And ultimately, we all came together, and I thought, and now we're on our second round of it now. We just had a meeting this week, in fact, to talk about the next step in the.
And are all 11 leagues back? And if it's
we'll
not
see.
all,
We might even have more. We'll see if it's all 11 or if it's a different group.
mix. Yeah.
But I think everyone felt really good about what we did before, and very proud of it.
So what we're just talking about is kind of the collective good, the social good, right? Which obviously is under a renewed sense of pressure with the current administration. The league has been pretty resolute in continuing to stand behind its efforts to champion inclusion, diversity, equity, etc. Yeah. That too takes courage, and at least in the moment is pushing against what is being pushed as the new status quo. How do you find the courage to do that as a business, and what role does marketing play in it?
Well, listen, I think you did put your finger on it in terms of the business aspect of it, because not only is what we're doing and have been doing a part of the values that we have at the NFL, but it's also helping us bring in more people, right? It's attracting more people, and which obviously for the NFL, we're only as strong as the people who want to engage in our content, right? Like that's how we earn money, by selling our content and licensing our brand and our content to an increasingly number of partners. And so I always share with these folks, and listen, if you just look at the numbers, a lot of our more traditional fans don't like it, right? They don't like when we talk about some of these subjects. They just want us to stick to football. But they still love the NFL.
Shut up and dribble.
Well, that's right. That's how they feel. A lot of them do. But I think that they also appreciate that we are always very I would say authentic in the way we come across. We focus on things which we can all agree on, like from a uniting people. And like, for example, the big spot we ran in the Super Bowl this year was about mentoring and helping young people achieve success, right? And I think it's hard to argue against that, particularly if you do it in a very powerful way. But at the NFL, I just show how it's bringing in more, younger people, more casual audiences, bringing in more women, right? More people of color, is bringing them. So we are right now at the highest number of fans we've ever had in the history of the NFL. Okay. Perceptions, which again were really low when I came in at 2018. Now they're the highest ever in the league.
What are you measuring inside that? What are you looking for?
We're measuring how people value the brand. We're measuring how much, obviously, that they want to be fans, how interested they are in getting more involved and engaged with the brand, how interested they are in watching more football.
Sorry to interrupt. When you talk about getting more engaged with the brand, do you mean the brand or do you mean the product, or both? Not that there.
I mean,
there's an inextricable link, and I just made it a binary choice. But what's it mean to want to get more engaged with the brand?
I mean, essentially, the NFL. So let me say this. I see myself as sort of like leading the ambassador of football, right? Not just the NFL, but of football, because ultimately, if someone is interested in participating and engaging and watching football, they will, most of them at least, will engage and watch the NFL at some point in their lives. But when I talk about the brand, I'm talking about the NFL and the 32 teams.
Right. Okay.
That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Right. And you're right. Our product is football.
What you as a league, I'm sure, I don't mean wrestle necessarily to be implicitly negative, but I'm sure there was at least a conversation where there was some consideration of alienating people. And I think across issues, across campaigns, opportunities, etc., there are a lot of CEOs who wrestle with doing new things, good things, the right thing for fear of alienating. So because of fear of alienating, which is real, right? And the consequences can be significant if that, the commercial consequences, if that alienation scales. But how do you overcome, what's your advice to the audience, the CEOs and CMOs alike, on how to kind of consider and evaluate risk of alienation versus benefit of acquisition and retention?
Again, I think you have to ground it in what you're trying to achieve. Is it aligned with the values that you espouse as a company? And ultimately, is it helping you be better? I think, diversity and inclusion is helping the NFL be better. And Roger Goodell has said that very clearly, right? It helps us bring in the right people. It strengthens our league. It strengthens the ranks of our coaches and of our players and of the people around the NFL who are sort of driving the league forward. And I think when you're consistent with what you believe and you continue to do it and not react constantly, I think that's what I think is important, because, I always say brands are like people, right? When they act one way one day and one way the other, no one trusts you.
The NFL is a private enterprise, right? Even if some of the teams are publicly traded, you have the benefit of not being subject to the whims of the capital markets day in and day out. That would seem to me to be an advantage that facilitates the thinking long term the way you have just been articulating it, right? What you're talking about is long-term growth,
Correct.
long-term viability. And I wonder if, having worked for publicly traded companies before, quite a few, if you do think that that's an advantage, and where you're thinking, actually more importantly than whether you think that's an advantage, how you balance as a marketer, as a business leader, the short and the long.
Yeah, listen, you can't forget about the short term because obviously you're paid to deliver on the short term as well. But I think that the brands that are the most successful constantly have their eye on how the short term is building for the long term.
And how the long term, tomorrow's long term is next week's short term.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. So, because I just told you like the 3 acquisition targets we have, young people, girls and women, and Latinos, they are what's driving our growth. So when I talk about, biggest fan base ever, it's because, and I have very clear evidence to show it. It's because of those 3 targets. They are the ones that are building our fan base. They also happen to be making the brand more interesting.
Right.
Like, think about Latino culture, right? Like Bad Bunny and so many incredible sort of artists out there and musicians who are really just changing the world with their with who they are and with their art. And that's making our brand more interesting too. It's making it younger. It's making it cooler. It's making it less predictable, and that's great for everybody, right?
So as we get towards time, and it's gone more quickly than I realized. Share a story, if you would, before the league, maybe early in your career that made you the marketer you are today, and then I want to ask you what advice you'd have for the CEOs, boards, and CFOs who are listening and watching who don't have marketing experience about how to give their CMOs, their marketing orgs, the permission to go fuck up, as we discussed before, so that they can succeed brilliantly because of that permission.
I think, listen, when I always tell people that when I was at Goodby Silverstein and Partners. At that time, it was actually Goodby Berlin and Silverstein. Andy Berlin was still there. The way that we approached our work of like really taking the time to understand the audience, like to get deep insights that we could then use to spark creativity, right? And everybody who worked for that agency was a part of it. Like, you weren't there just to make a client happy. I was an account, person. You weren't there just to make them happy or to sort of, buy them a cup of coffee. You were there to help get to the right place and then to sort of obviously demonstrate and bring in the client so they understood how that was all going to work, and that also that they had a sense of accountability and pride in the final work. That they were fantastic, and they still are, but they're fantastic at crafting things, right? So not only did they take the time to really understand the audience and build an idea around true insight and something which really was powerful to people and that would like immediately resonate with them. But they took the time to get the right artists and to craft the work to where everything we did felt like a big blockbuster film or something, right? The actors, the directors, the execution, the editing, the color, everything.
But
right?
I think for the CEO and who doesn't understand marketing because they don't come from it, I think what that might do is reinforce the stereotype that marketing is about the production rather than the outcome, right? That it's the big Hollywood, the marketers, the creative internally, and that it doesn't get to the outcome, to the commercial benefit. And when we had a conversation with David Droger for this show, it was one of the things he said, right? Which is, I asked him what does he think CEOs think marketing is? He's like, jazz hands and pretty pictures.
Yeah.
I believe that's what he said. And I wonder, as a craftsman yourself, right?
Yeah.
And you are very involved in the craft and the output of the creative product,
Right.
how you then, even before it's out in the world, how you evaluate good and say, yeah, this has, like your Darth Vader ad in 2011, which I will put in the show notes, why you think a piece of work is good, to say nothing of a collective body of work, is going to drive commercial outcome.
Well, I'm gonna answer that question, but I want to step back for a moment here, because what you said there in terms of like playing into the stereotypes of like, willy-nilly marketing people that all they care about is a nice ad. I will say this: it is incredibly important as a CMO to really have a very balanced program, which in every way, ultimately in a very efficient, effective way, hits your audience with the right messages at the right time in the right place. Okay. I have built an absolute marketing machine at the NFL, and everything we're doing around data-driven marketing, one-to-one marketing, everything we're doing around our social and influencer and creator program, which just gets like exponentially insane views and coverage because of how we work and the partnerships that we have created, are as important as any ad that we may put on a game or a Super Bowl or whatever. So I want to say that because that's critical. And so how you go to market and how you build that machine is really important. I am sick and tired about hearing a CMO has to be a brand CMO or they have to be a data CMO. That's just bullshit.
It's nonsense.
Right? It's just bullshit. You have to be able to do both. Now,
so many false narratives.
Do I have as much experience as some of the guys that work for Netflix and Google on data-driven marketing? Of course not. I mean, I happen to work at Activision, where it's pretty damn important, right? Like one-to-one marketing was very important in terms of driving and monetizing your game year-round. But I mean, sure, I came 12 years in as an agency person, and I don't have as much experience as somebody from Google or Amazon or something. On the other hand, I surround myself with experts who really know this stuff and can bring it to life in the most amazing ways, and I let them go. I point them in the right direction. I learn from them and so forth, but I let them go. I let them do their jobs. And then when it comes to every other aspect of our program, I ensure that it's balanced. We are slaves to the right KPIs to ensure that things are having the right impact. And I think when I have discussions with our CFO and with our CEO, who of course is the commissioner, I very carefully lay out, this is how it works. This is directly going to do this. This is indirectly going to do that. And this is how we are moving people towards the journey of the sale or to the desired effect, where in our product, people will engage, right? So I'm very careful to sort of lay those things out. I do the same thing with our committees of owners and with our total 32 owner group. I very carefully lay out, this is how it's all going to work. This is why we're doing what we're doing. This is why it's so important to get certain things right. And now I'm going to come back to the crafting part and to the creative part. Like, if you want to win people over, if you want to, create something which will truly make them think differently about the league and make them want to spend more time with you, not less, but more time with you, you have to connect with them on a human level and on an emotional level. And these are the kinds of things that we have done and need to continue to do, which will fuel our success, if that makes sense, right? So I can actually show them, these are the things, the executions, and these are the campaigns, and these are the things, and this is how we're interpreting the results of that campaign, which are helping driving our success. And if you don't get down to that level of like understanding the KPIs and then really explaining how all those things come together to create success, right? Then people are left to sort of like wonder, like, well, why do we need to do these ads, or why do we need to, do all this stuff? Well, it's costing too much money, right? If we need to save more money or we need to put more to the bottom line, let's just shave off more of the marketing budget.
Always the first to go.
It is. It is
Yeah.
always the first to go. And it's up to the CMOs
but it's
to
the
really
first
prove
to
out
go.
why it's
It's
important.
interesting because, of course, it's not always. It's usually, and that's typically driven by those who see it as an expense and don't understand it as an investment. And I can't remember who it was, so I will be vague and not guess. But I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, when consumer spending started to understandably contract, there was a CPG company, as I recall, who rather than cutting marketing, doubled into marketing, kind of, because they understood it to be the investment, and they understood what people were looking for, hoping for, and needing in that moment. And so, as a last question, and thank you for being with us, appreciate it.
I always enjoy speaking with you, Seth. This has been great.
What's your advice to the CEO, CFO board who actually doesn't have that marketing experience on how to be a better ally to a marketing org and a CMO?
Take the time to really sit down and ask questions and listen and make your CMO prove out, like, or I wouldn't maybe not say it's prove out, but it's also explaining how it all works. Listen, the problem is that so much of, traditionally at least, so much of the marketing which most people see, right, it seems relatively simple. And they react, right?
That's part of the craft.
We're all consumers of marketing, advertising, marketing. So it seems relatively simple, but we need to be better. First of all, I think we need to be better at marketing our own marketing.
No
right?
doubt, yeah,
that's for sure. Because we just don't take the time to actually explain and to sort of allow people to understand what it is that we're doing. And
yeah,
why,
that's been a real
right?
through line.
Yeah. And so, but I think that, taking the time to actually sit down and go through it, and not just like going through some sexy thing you did last week that you want to get 5 minutes and show the CEO the work. Actually, no, carve out a significant amount of time to go into depth on all the things that you were doing. I mean, if you were, if you came in as an engineer on a new product, or if you came in as a CFO on a 5-year plan, you wouldn't do it in 10 minutes, right? You would take time. You would take the appropriate level of time to really get into it and to explain it and to sort of be open and be vulnerable, like show this is what's working. This wasn't working as well. So we made some decisions to change this and go here. Look how this is working here. But really explain what you're doing and why, and be willing to show that not everything worked exactly according to plan.
As opposed to the rest of life where it all goes exactly
according.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's really true. You don't have to. So many times I see marketing people, they go up and they sell, right? There is a difference between taking people through your work and showing them things than selling. They're afraid to say that anything is not great. They're afraid to say, well, this actually grew because of this, not just because my ad was great or my one-to-one program was amazing. This also helped. Right? This we thought was going to happen this way, but it actually didn't happen quite that way. So we learned and we made some adjustments. There's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, to the contrary,
no,
it's
earns
essential.
You trust.
Yeah,
it earns you trust, and it's like, okay, I believe I trust this person. They're constantly moving toward excellence. And by the way, the overall numbers look pretty good, right? And so so then what you want, of course, is you want your CEO or your CFO. Okay, well, what can I do to sort of help, right, make this go even stronger, right? And then that gives you the opportunity to sort of really share these things with your executive team. And so I'm very fortunate right now. I think I've earned that right, but I'm on the highest boards. I am a direct report of Commissioner Goodell, and I'm on that board that we don't talk just about marketing. I contribute. I talk about the business. I mean,
Right.
I'm open about everything, and I invite my colleagues to be open about what I do. Right? I want to hear what they think.
Yeah, you're not going to get better if you don't.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. I think that when you're sitting on the sort of the highest level board of the company and you're talking about things which aren't necessarily about marketing, then you're a part of the business. You know that you're having impact and influence on how the business is run, and they see you differently. right? They just see you
and
differently.
the propensity to be a Monday morning marketer.
Yeah.
You like what I
And-
did
and
there.
take the time
by the
to
way,
get
I,
out of
I
your-
want some credit for that. Monday morning quarterback, Monday morning marketer.
That's pretty
It's
good.
not bad. I've done worse for sure. Thanks, man. Really appreciate you being here, and
Yeah.
love your point about the difference between explaining and selling.
Yeah.
The difference between involving and pitching.
Yeah.
Because that's where understanding comes from. With that, we want to thank our listeners and our viewers. Appreciate you being with us as always. Hit the subscribe button. Give it all the stars you possibly can. We'll see you next time. Thanks.